The MiG-29, or Fulcrum as it is designated by NATO, is commonly accepted as being one of the world's greatest fighters. It was developed during the sinister days of the Cold War and was the Soviets' attempt to wrestle air supremacy from the West in any conflict. Thankfully, the end of the Cold War prevented this scenario from becoming reality. Arguably the most advanced fighter in the world today, its capabilities in terms of maneuverability and directional stability at large attack angles make the MiG-29 a formidable weapon. The concept behind the plane's development was a complete departure from normal Soviet thinking. Contrary to what most in the West believed, Soviet fighters were designed for defensive rather than offensive roles. The MiG-29 was the first post-war Soviet aircraft designed specifically for an offensive as well as a defensive role. But the MiG-29 is only the latest in a long line of advanced jet fighters that have been produced by the Mikoyan Design Bureau. The first generation MiG-9 appeared in the late 40s and carried the Soviet Air Force into the jet age. Powered by a BMW jet engine design captured from Germany, it was thought to have been inspired by German wartime research. The MiG-15 appeared in the early 1950s and became the mainstay of the Soviet fighter force. It was powered by a copy of the Rolls-Royce Nene, the most advanced jet engine in the world at that time, and it caused considerable alarm to the UN forces during the Korean War, where it was used extensively. Many of the MiG-15s operated by the North Korean Air Force were actually flown by Soviet and Chinese pilots, and it proved superior to all Allied aircraft types. Only the North American F-86 Sabre could take on the MiG on anything approaching equal terms, and the loss ratio in their favor reflects the great experience and high level of training of the American pilots, rather than the capabilities of the aircraft. Through constant development and revised design, Mikoyan built the MiG-17 and the supersonic MiG-19, both of which served the Soviet Air Force and its allies in large numbers. Sukhoi, Mikoyan's contemporary and rival aircraft manufacturer, also produced a series of fighters and attack aircraft that complemented Mikoyan's output. The MiG-21, which entered service in 1959, was considered the equal of its Western rivals. With a reported 13,000 built, it's one of the most prolific of post-war fighters. Although simple in design, it's easy to maintain and operate and is still flown by air forces all over the world. The variable geometry, or swing-wing MiG-23, appeared in the mid-1970s as both an interceptor and strike fighter, and for over a decade these two types were the backbone of the Soviet air defenses. Developed from the MiG-23 was the MiG-27, a dedicated attack variant which operated from bases in Poland and East Germany. But perhaps the most infamous mark of MiG was the MiG-25 Foxbat. Capable of reaching Mach 2.8, it shattered dozens of speed and altitude records and was developed in response to US supersonic bomber projects. However, when Russian pilot Viktor Belenko defected in one in 1976, it was found to be a very straightforward, simple design. The Soviets needed to develop an aircraft that could win dogfights, this being perceived as the essence of air superiority. In the 1970s, NATO air forces operated an array of fighter aircraft, many with superior combat capabilities to Soviet types. Combat aircraft engage each other in a dogfight after an unsuccessful missile attack, or when an adversary suddenly appears at close range. The Mikoyan Bureau's new plane would have to compete on equal or even superior terms. This thinking formed the basis of Mikoyan's brief. After years of research, the Bureau decided to widen the brief and incorporate many new design and construction features that had been developed. At the time, many of these ideas were revolutionary in terms of modern fighter technology. The task the Bureau set itself was to develop a fighter that was capable of destroying aircraft at medium and short range in dogfight scenarios. It was also to be capable of shooting down adversaries that could be detected at high altitude or flying at low level against radar ground clutter. It would also have to be effective day or night in good or bad weather conditions and with active or passive radar jamming in operation. Lastly, it was to have a strike capability and be effective against armored vehicles, both stationary and moving. The resulting MiG-29 far exceeded all Soviet expectations. The Mikoyan Bureau had truly designed an aircraft of the future. A complete integral aerodynamic configuration ensured every portion of the body and wings of the aircraft assisted its lift ability, making it one of the most maneuverable fighters in the world. Unlike all the other innovative design features embodied in the early MiG-29, the cockpit housed a conventional control system. Although this lacked the sophistication of fly-by-wire technology, it had the advantage of being easy to master by experienced pilots. The canopy has a frameless windscreen which is rigidly attached to the aircraft fuselage with the hinged portion opening up backwards. Its well-thought-out arrangement allows the pilot a good, practical all-round view from the cockpit. The cockpit instrumentation is extremely comprehensive, allowing the pilot full knowledge of the internal and external status of the aircraft at all times. In the event of an emergency, the pilot can eject by pulling a twin handle between his knees. This results in the automatic actuation of the emergency system sequence by firstly jettisoning the canopy and secondly igniting the seat rocket which propels the pilot safely away from the aircraft. Protection for the pilot from the dynamic air pressure during ejection is ensured by his high-altitude clothing and steady stabilization of the seat as it exits the aircraft. Leonid Lobas is the chief test pilot for Mikoyan.
И, в общем-то, он конструировался уже с таким разрезом, чтобы облегчить летчику возможность выполнения, так сказать, технических чисто функций.
This plane is easy to fly, a fourth-generation plane of precision engineering. Its automatic, high-tech facilities make it simple for the pilot to perform well, leaving him to concentrate on ensuring the successful accomplishment of a combat mission. From the plane's complex navigation system to its multiplicity of armament, it is a richly equipped modern machine designed to fulfill a wide variety of tasks. The pilot is practically relieved of many of his usual responsibilities thanks to the systems of automatic control. It is also extremely reliable with many backup or dual systems, vitally important.
И дублировано много систем.
When Western intelligence became aware of the MiG-29 design, concern rippled through NATO's air forces. The new aircraft appeared, on the surface at least, to be as advanced as the new generation of Western fighters. It was also believed that the aircraft would be built in huge numbers, as had its predecessor, the MiG-21. NATO had always relied on technical superiority to counter the perceived numerical advantage of the Soviet Air Force and those of the Warsaw Pact. Now, with the MiG-29 and the new larger Sukhoi Su-27 flanker, it seemed that the West was to be confronted by a bigger force of equal or superior aircraft. The introduction of the sleek new aircraft with its greater capabilities suggested that Soviet air doctrine had changed as well. For years, NATO air forces had trained to combat a rigid Soviet command system. It seemed that because of the versatility of the MiG-29 and the Su-27, a whole new set of tactics would have to be planned, tested, and implemented into the training of NATO pilots. The eventual collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s must have come as a great relief to NATO's air command. The MiG-29 is powered by two Chumansky RD-33 turbojet engines, both of which have two air intakes. Each engine generates over 8,300 kilograms of static thrust, and is equipped with an afterburner and adjustable supersonic nozzle. The engines can be started either jointly or independently. Windmilling starts the engines in flight. This is ensured by a main combustion chamber oxygen supply system fitted to each engine. The engines are arranged below the main load-bearing elements of the fuselage, ensuring convenient access for removal and maintenance, making it popular with ground crews.
For those of us that have to service this aircraft, its design is perfect in every respect. Take the engine. The removal and installation of a new engine takes only a short amount of time, about 45 minutes. It has very few mounting joints. The cowling can be taken apart very easily and quickly, allowing easy access to the main units of the engine. Also, the location of the engine is relatively low. Therefore, Mikhail designed its air intake system in such a way that during the plane's line-up, run and take off, this panel closes and the air intake goes through the upper hole, thereby protecting the engine from runway dust and debris.
The tricycle undercarriage of the aircraft consists of the steering nose gear with two main struts, each having one braked wheel. Retraction and extension of the nose and main landing gear are simultaneous. The nose wheel is retracted backwards and the main ones forward. The system has proved to be sturdy and means that the MiG-29 can operate from rough airstrips. To assist in braking, the drag chute container at the rear of the aircraft contains a parachute controlled by an electro-pneumatic system for release. Drag chutes are essential with fast, heavy fighter aircraft to limit the landing run without causing excessive wear to the brakes. In case of fire, the aircraft is fitted with fire extinguisher spray manifolds arranged in the engine compartments and gearbox. If the system detects a fire, the whole process is automatic, as can be witnessed in this remarkable footage of an abortive takeoff of a two-seater trainer MiG-29UB. Despite the sparks and the fact that the aircraft is loaded with fuel, no fire breaks out. In fact, both pupil and instructor escape unscathed. The highly advanced aerodynamics used in the design of the MiG-29 ensure great maneuverability.
This aircraft has a thoroughly thought-out arrangement of aerodynamics. It has an extremely solid scheme of integral aerodynamic design. Bearing loads on the fuselage are extremely high, but not so on the wings. Its integrated design makes it highly maneuverable and balanced, even when subjected to very high G-forces. It was designed for high-altitude dogfights, which require extreme maneuverability in order to be successful.
The flight system incorporates ailerons and stabilizers for lateral control and rudder stabilizers for pitch control. In addition to this, the aircraft has directional leading edges on the wings, flaps and air brakes. The control system linkage consists of control rods and bell cranks, engaging electric and hydraulic units. Imitation of the forces on the control stick and pedals is made by artificial field units, which engage in all three channels of the aircraft's control linkage. The pilot is provided with information of the present and maximum tolerable angles of attack and vertical load factors by an automatic system of limiting signals. The aircraft can be controlled both manually and automatically. The weapons systems of the aircraft consist of 3 target-seeking channels. The radar aiming complex, housed in the nose cone of the aircraft, is intended for day or night interception of air targets in all weather conditions. It has a target detection range of 100 kilometers and can track up to 10 targets at once and lock on to the most dangerous one. The system remains 100% operable even under conditions of radar jamming. An infrared detector and laser rangefinder, or COLS, is utilized for medium-range targets. Once the target has been pinpointed by the heat seeker, the laser rangefinder comes into operation. This system can also detect targets that are flying behind the aircraft. Once the target has been identified and locked onto, a suitable weapon from the vast array the plane carries is chosen. The MiG-29 can carry several combinations of weapons. Air-to-air medium-range missiles with semi-active radar guidance. These missiles are principally employed for firing at aircraft out of visual range. The aircraft can also operate with short-range air-to-air missiles with passive heat homing, which are used for close-quarter dogfighting. Unguided 240mm and 80mm rockets can be used for both air-to-air and air-to-ground use. Aerial bombs of various types and weights and specialist anti-radar missiles, together with a fixed 30mm cannon, complete the MiG-29's ordnance. The third targeting arrangement the aircraft employs is a highly sophisticated optical and electronic aiming system for close maneuvering air combat or dogfighting. The target acquisition system is mounted in the pilot's helmet, which relays all essential data to short-range missiles, COLS, and the radar systems. All of which confirms the MiG-29's reputation as a formidable fighting machine with great maneuverability and deployment potential. All MiG-29s are built at the Moscow aircraft building plant, which uses the same sophisticated production techniques and methods that are found in any Western aircraft manufacturing plant.
The fuel tank is the heart of the structure of the plane. Everything is fixed to it: the wings, landing gear, nose and tail. Therefore, it is extremely strong. It consists of 3 frames of very high tensile strength, incorporating about 130 meters of welding lines. Because of its important role, it is rigorously tested. It is X-rayed, tested magnetically, and for possible leakage, paint tested.
It is essential that the integral parts of the aircraft structure are tested to the maximum limits possible, well before they take to the air. Because of the central role that the fuel tank fulfills, rigorous tests prove its integrity and its ability to support other major components without rupturing under the heavy stresses placed on it. Once the testing engineers are satisfied that the fuel tank is up to the job, it's transferred to the assembly shop, where other components are added around it. The MiG finally starts to resemble an aircraft at this stage. As more components are added, it takes on its familiar shape. It's essential that a high level of workmanship is maintained throughout the entire construction process. Any errors now will cost considerable time, money and effort later if an aircraft needs to be returned to the workshop.
This building houses the complete assembly line for the world-famous jet fighter, the MiG-29. Our best workers are employed to assemble the plane. Here we fit the hydraulics, fuel systems, electronics and radio components. In fact, all the main systems of the plane. Quality control tests all the components that go into the plane. When we have completed the installations, representatives from the Air Force have to approve our work before the plane can be sent to the flight test center of our plant so that the engines, etc. can be fitted. Each plane then goes through a series of test flights before it is delivered to the Air Force. The plant had to come up with several new manufacturing innovations to facilitate the construction of the MiG-29 due to its radical design. However, the construction of a MiG-29 is now as easy as the pilots say it is to handle. The plane is also simple to maintain. For instance, it only requires 45 minutes to change the engines. Other planes of the same generation generally take 8 to 10 hours for the same procedure. It can also be disassembled easily, allowing transportation of the plane in containers by land, sea or air. We at the factory receive a lot of compliments from both Russian and from foreign pilots about the MiG-29. Recently we were in Chile, attending the Chilean air show, and pilots from that country and also Brazil said of the MiG-29 that it was the best fighter they had ever flown and the easiest to handle. The plane for the ordinary pilot.
Design and construction of the aircraft takes into account much of recent Western technology. Many of the parts are made of composite materials where the major component is carbon fiber. Joints are made from highest purity aluminium, steel and titanium, with many internal structures honeycombed for maximum strength and minimum weight. All in all, from start to finish, the manufacture of a MiG-29 takes about 1 month. The factory is building an average of 15 MiGs at any one time. Flight tests of the MiG-29 began in the mid-70s. Its maiden flight was carried out by test pilot Taktor Abudakirov, who was to more than prove that the right design decisions had been taken. As with any new aircraft, testing was carried out on all flight systems on the ground before the MiG was allowed to get airborne. When the design team and pilot were satisfied that everything was working correctly, taxiing trials commenced. Finally, the aircraft began its first flight, and then a series of trials to prove that it was able to perform everything that was demanded of it. In fact, the flight trials, especially when putting the plane through its paces at high angles of attack, showed that its flight characteristics were far better than the theoretical design figures had predicted. The obvious concern that the design team felt before the MiG's first flight was to prove groundless. The prototype provided a highly successful and comprehensive flight test program that exceeded all expectations. Mikoyan had designed a winner, and the team were jubilant. Early in the test program, Abudakirov found that the aircraft had exemplary handling qualities. While being able to perform exceptional aerobatics, the aircraft was also relatively easy to fly. Testing was a continuous process. Several modifications to improve performance were carried out, and then in October 1977, the aircraft's abilities were demonstrated to the Soviet Premier, Leonid Brezhnev. Mikoyan was looking to fund development of the aircraft for the Soviet Air Force and sought approval from the highest level. Brezhnev was suitably impressed, and the aircraft went into production. From the mid-80s, testing began on a naval version that could fly from the new Tbilisi-class aircraft carrier. Using a runway ski ramp for initial trials, similar to that designed for the Royal Navy's Sea Harrier Force, the modified MiG-29 took to its new role like a duck to water. Within a very short space of time, actual trials on the carrier itself by the plane's first test pilot, Takhtar Abudakirov, proved extremely successful. The MiG-29 was shown to have the tough airframe required of naval operations. Modifications included a retractable arrestor hook to shorten its landing run. This kind of operation puts much higher stresses on the airframe than conventional land operations. Often the performance of naval aircraft is affected by the heavier, strengthened structure and added equipment required of maritime operations. But there was little adverse effect on the performance of the navalized MiG-29. Like most naval aircraft, it also has folding wings. Space is always at a premium on an aircraft carrier. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the carrier program has been in jeopardy. But the Russian Navy was pleased to accept one of the most advanced fighters in the world to add to its arsenal. Since the early 1990s, MiG-29s have frequently appeared at Western air shows. Here, one is put through its paces in a stunning display of aerobatics and controllability. In the former Soviet Union, MiG-29s are now regular attenders at air shows, upholding Russia's fine and proud aviation tradition. Around the world, the MiG-29 has become a showstopper. By the mid-80s, the MiG-29 Fulcrum was equipping many of the Soviet Union's frontline units, replacing obsolete MiG-21s and aging MiG-23s. This major re-equipment program also included the introduction of other types, such as the bigger Sukhoi Su-27 flanker. The MiG-29, being cheaper and easier to operate, has also become standard equipment with many other air forces. The Warsaw Pact started operating the type soon after the Soviet Union. Other countries outside the old Warsaw Pact are now operating the MiG-29 as well, including India, Finland, and Iraq. Ironically, those that were operated by the East German Air Force were transferred to the West German Luftwaffe after German reunification. Now that the West has access to this aeroplane, it's been pitted against some of the best NATO types, such as the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon. Generally, in mock combats, the MiG-29 has favored well against US types, although it is reported that its limited endurance could affect its operational capabilities. Now, it's even possible for wealthy members of the public to find out for themselves just how well the MiG-29 handles. For a fee of around £10,000, an enthusiast can actually test fly a two-seater at an airbase just outside Moscow. The once top-secret MiG-29 is now open to the scrutiny of anyone who can afford the fee and pass the fitness test. By the end of 1989, over 700 original MiG-29s had been delivered. During the late 80s, however, it became apparent to the Mikoyan Design Bureau that the MiG-29 required fly-by-wire technology incorporated in the aircraft for it to achieve its full aerodynamic potential. The new version, which incorporated fly-by-wire technology, was called the 29M. The aircraft's aerodynamic layout with its high thrust-to-weight ratio provided the aircraft with perfect control, as well as careful handling performance. The main differences to the original version were the changes in the center of gravity of the aircraft in order to achieve relaxed stability. As with most modern fighters using fly-by-wire technology, the aircraft is made unstable and therefore paradoxically more maneuverable. The Mikoyan Bureau fitted the aircraft with fly-by-wire quadruplex digital control. As we shall see in this sequence, certain maneuvers that the MiG-29 could achieve only became possible with fly-by-wire controls. Essentially, the quadruplex digital control computers refused to let the aircraft stall, as it would do if the pilot alone was in charge. The fantastic and impressive tail slide. The very high angle of attack pass at very low speeds. Very high rate of roll. And lastly, the famous MiG-29 fly-by-wire trick of the trade, the Cobra, a staggering example of what used to be thought of as an impossible maneuver. The MiG-29's ability to perform these maneuvers has gained it a crowd-pleasing reputation at air shows around the world.
Russian military aircraft have traditionally been more highly maneuverable, stable and controllable than their Western counterparts. I cannot say the same about our control systems, where we have always lagged behind. But in questions of engine manufacture, reliability, stability, maneuverability and strength, we have undoubtedly reached the highest level. The MiG-29's capabilities have never been tested in any major conflict, although it did see service in the Gulf War with the Iraqi Air Force. One typical example of its survivability occurred when a rocket hit the engine nozzle and exploded. The plane, nevertheless, returned safely to its base, a good example of its power of survival.
So what of the MiG-29's combat record? Surely the acid test for any military aircraft. Despite there being many air forces operating the MiG-29, it has, thankfully, seen very little combat. But it's reported to have seen limited operations on at least 4 occasions. Syrian Air Force MiG-29s were reported to be the first when they clashed with Israeli Air Force F-15 Eagles and F-16 fighting Fulcrums over the Golan area and southwest Lebanon in 1990-91. Unconfirmed rumors suggest that one MiG-29 was shot down by an F-15C. Yugoslav Air Force MiG-29s were also reported to have been in action during the early days of the war in Bosnia and Croatia. Although no air-to-air combat took place, they operated as ground attack strike fighters, and at least one MiG is reported to have been shot down by ground fire. In 1994, 12 ex-Moldovan MiG-29s, apparently flown by Moldovan mercenaries, were reported to have gone into action on behalf of secessionist rebels in southern Yemen. 1 was shot down during ground support operations, 6 were destroyed on the ground, and the remaining 5 were captured. Most famously, though, the MiG-29 operated as part of Saddam Hussein's Iraqi Air Force during the Gulf War. In this conflict, they were heavily outnumbered by the coalition air forces, and up to 5 were shot down in aerial combat without inflicting damage on the coalition air forces. Generally, the MiG-29's combat record remains inconclusive. So what does the future hold for Mikoyan and its fighter?
With regard to the future, well, I have to say that at the moment we're all worried. The MiG-29 does have a vast untapped potential. Unfortunately, we do not have the financial resources to continue development at the present time. All development work is temporarily suspended. However, all in all, the plane has great potential, and any professional must appreciate what is already contained in this magnificent aircraft.
It's ironic that as the Soviet Union equipped its air forces with aircraft of comparable performance to the West, the whole structure of communist Russia collapsed. Although the type is still widely employed by Russia and other republics that were formerly within the Soviet Union, it is unlikely that they will have to confront their Western counterparts. As the Cold War comes to a close, huge cuts in defense research spending on both sides of the old Iron Curtain have curtailed or slowed the development of many weapons systems. The great superpowers are no longer an immediate threat to each other. We've witnessed the end of an era, and the arms race is no longer necessary. Those involved in the development of weaponry, whether it be aircraft, tanks, ships, or any other tool of war, no longer have such a demanding market. But if the Mikoyan Bureau is to stay in business, then it must develop relationships internationally with other design bureaus and use its undoubted talents in aircraft design for commercial purposes. The international aerospace industry could only benefit from the wealth of experience contained in the Mikoyan Design Bureau. The MiG-29 remains as a legacy to perfection in aerodynamic excellence. It is perhaps the last of Russia's great fighters.
Take off in a Russian beast of a boatplane and the latest high-tech airship. Flightline rising on Night Discovery next.